Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video on the Gooners and Gloves Podcast channel. In today's video, it's going to be the 88th Gooners and Gloves Podcast, and I'm going to be giving you guys my thoughts and reactions to the Jake Paul versus Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. fight. The result officially was Jake Paul winning by unanimous decision, so I didn't quite get my prediction fully correct because I said he'd win by knockout/technical knockout, but he actually went the distance. But I mean, yeah, it's what we expected. I mean, look, as much as we all wanted Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. to do something, I think we all pretty much accepted that it wasn't going to happen. And, throughout the whole fight, he just really didn't do much of anything. He did pick it up in the last two rounds, which, it was kind of frustrating to see because he picked up in the last two rounds and was actually giving Jake some problems. Jake looked absolutely exhausted after like the 8th round. So it sucks to see that he only picked it up late on because it showed that he definitely could have done more. Like, he could have done something to Jake, in my opinion, had he picked it up a bit earlier. I'm not saying he'd have like knocked out Jake Paul or anything, but he could have given him more problems. He could have made it closer on the scorecards. But, by the time we got to the last two rounds, Jake Paul had already banked a lot of rounds. And so for that reason, there was no drama with the decision. And it was always obvious that Jake Paul was going to be given the decision. To be fair, deservingly so. He did dominate the majority of the fight. So yeah, obviously, end of the day, there's a reason why we shouldn't take these influencer fights too seriously. End of the day, there was a massive weight difference. There's an 11-year age gap. It was always clear that Chavez wasn't going to do much of anything. As much as I wanted him to, and as much as I was rooting for him to, I was realistic in my prediction, and this is why I predicted Jake. Admittedly, I am surprised that Jake Paul didn't get the stoppage. Given how big the size difference was, I am surprised that Jake Paul didn't get the stoppage. But I guess that is one thing I will give Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. credit for. I didn't expect him to make the distance against someone who's way bigger and way younger than him. But fair play to Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. for making the distance. But that being said, it was a dominant performance by Jake Paul. So pretty much when the fight began, I mean, for the first 3 rounds, Chavez just really wasn't throwing much of anything. Really, he was barely throwing. Like, it was strange because like he really wasn't throwing much of anything. So Jake Paul kind of just, through sheer activity, just won the first 3 rounds, kind of just based purely on activity. Jake was landing a decent amount. I wouldn't say he was like massively landing loads of punches himself, but he was obviously far more active. So him winning the rounds was kind of obvious. Like, end of the day, just based on pure activity, he obviously was winning the rounds. When we started getting to the mid stages, there still wasn't much activity from Julio Cesar Chavez. There was a little bit, like, he started throwing a little bit more and kind of throwing a few punches, but again, just the activity wasn't there. So for that reason, Jake Paul kind of just kept coming forward, kept landing the combinations, and so for that reason, there was just never really any danger of him losing these rounds. Not only that, but also Jake Paul's confidence was only growing, so he only kept coming forward because obviously Chavez just wasn't giving him a reason to be worried, or he wasn't giving him anything to be scared of. Later in the fight, he definitely did, which I'll get to in a second, but kind of in the early to mid stages of the fight, he just wasn't throwing anything of substance back at Jake. So for that reason, Jake kind of just kept coming forward because he didn't really have a reason to be worried. He didn't have a reason to back off. He kept putting on the pressure, and so just kind of kept winning the rounds. Look, I understand that obviously cruiserweight is a very difficult weight class for Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Don't get me wrong, like that is a very hard weight class, and this is why for me it was always clear that Jake Paul was going to outpower him because the weight difference is crazy. Like, as I said in my previous video, Jake Paul, he weighed heavy. He weighed heavy for this fight, no doubt about it. He was very, very heavy for the fight, obviously because he has to cut down to get to cruiserweight. So obviously he's going to be massive on fight night. He's going to be able to rehydrate him, and you can see him in that picture. He looks huge at the weight class, and that's because he completely rehydrated obviously overnight before the fight, because that's how it goes. He cuts weight to get to cruiserweight, so obviously when he rehydrates, he's absolutely massive on fight night. Whereas Julio Cesar Chavez is another one in essentially a long string of opponents which have had to bulk up to get to cruiserweight. And obviously when you bulk up to get to a weight class in boxing, you're kind of just stuck at the limit because obviously you can't rehydrate because you haven't lost any weight, you've only gained weight. So yeah, there's a massive weight discrepancy there. So for that reason, I am surprised that Jake Paul didn't get the stoppage, and I do think that's something that probably doesn't reflect very well on him, the fact that he didn't get the stoppage. He did get a dominant unanimous decision, but to be fair, I think a lot of people were expecting the stoppage, and that's something that potentially may reflect badly on him and may alternatively reflect decently on Julio Cesar Chavez for making it the distance. But yeah, end of the day, there was just never really any drama apart from sort of the final 2 rounds. I mean, there was one point where Chavez was down by so many rounds, and then he started celebrating like crazy after the first round that he won, and obviously a lot of people were like, yeah, this is just, what is going on? Like, it's one of those fights where you're just like, what's going on, what's happening? You kind of just have to feel bad for the referee as well. I mean, it was obviously a very boring fight, as you'd imagine, so I can't imagine it must have been a very fun fight to referee because obviously there wasn't much drama. But to be be fair, in the last 2 rounds, or the last like 2 to 3 rounds, in fairness, Chavez Jr. did pick it up and actually did give Jake a few problems. Firstly, Jake was really, really tired. He was exhausted, and I think that's something that Jake Paul is definitely going to have to work on in future fights. Is his cardio. We know that it's always consistently been an issue, but it was very, very apparent in this fight. Now, admittedly, that could just be because he punched himself out. Obviously, he'd thrown so many punches by this point simply because Chavez just wasn't throwing much of anything. And who knows, maybe that's what Chavez was aiming for. Maybe he wanted Jake Paul to punch himself out, and maybe it just happened a bit later than he expected, so he didn't have as much time for the finish. That is possible. Maybe that was his game plan, let him punch himself out. In fairness, Chavez was doing a decent job at defending, but yeah, so sort of in the last 2 to 3 rounds, in fairness, Chavez did start to land some good punches, some good power punches, definitely snapping Jake Paul's head back a little bit, landing good shots, body shots and everything. So to be fair, Chavez Jr. did pick it up significantly in the last 2 to 3 rounds, and that's why it's so frustrating, because like you wonder why he didn't fight like this from the beginning. Like he really could have, I'm not going to say like dominated Jake or anything like that, because definitely not, but he definitely could have given Jake some problems, no doubt about it, because as I said before, he did give Jake a few problems kind of late on in the fight. In those rounds, he did give Jake a few problems. And you do wonder, had he fought like that from the beginning, would he have given Jake more problems, and could he have made this a more competitive fight? But that being said, you could also alternatively argue that it was just because Jake Paul had punched himself out and was tired. You could argue that. So yeah, but all in all, end of the day, that's why, we shouldn't take these fights too seriously. End of the day, they're for entertainment. End of the day, I get that they're not meant to be like taken to be serious boxing events or anything. I do understand that, so I'm not gonna hate on it too much, but end of the day, yeah, it just is what it is. It's I can't imagine it must have been fun for his father, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., of course, an absolute boxing legend, to watch his son just get dominated by Jake Paul. I can't imagine that must have been very fun. So I do feel for him, and yeah, all in all, it is what it was. Not a very entertaining fight as expected, but all in all, it did give us a show. It did give us entertainment, I guess. Where does Jake Paul go from here? We'll see. Apparently now he's actually going to be added to the WBC rankings. I read some things saying that as a result of this win, he could be added to the WBC rankings, which I don't even know how to react to that. I mean, that's just, yeah, I mean, ridiculous, but there you go. So yeah, I do wonder where Jake Paul goes from here. Obviously, you'd imagine he's going to keep fighting. End of the day, he said he wants to be a world champion, so make of that what you will. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Jake Paul, and also what happens with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. I did see a few people saying because of those last 2 rounds that you could argue for a rematch, and maybe Chavez will take it more seriously. Maybe, but I doubt that Jake Paul would entertain that, to be honest. But end of the day, we'll see what happens. But all in all, that's my thoughts on it. So Jake Paul with a good performance, but against a very clearly, lackluster opponent who just didn't really try very hard until sort of the last 2 rounds, and when he actually was trying harder, Jake Paul was getting hit, he was getting punched, hit with punches, and he was finding it more difficult. He was also very, very tired. So yeah, all in all, don't get me wrong, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. has still had a good career in boxing. I'm not taking that away from him. He has had a good career in boxing, but it just sucks to see that he kind of didn't really try too hard until the last few rounds. But in any case, I don't want to insult anyone. Ultimately, anyone who gets into the ring deserves respect, and they both got into the ring. They both gave us 10 rounds of boxing, so there is that. But anyway, I don't want to ramble on too much. Those are my main thoughts immediately following the fight. So all in all, a good performance by Jake, but obviously, given the circumstances, the weight advantage, the 11-year age gap, being more athletic, etc., you would expect that he would get the win. I expected him to get the stoppage, to be honest, but anyway, that's going to go on and do it for this podcast. I don't want to ramble on too much. That's kind of my main thoughts on the fight. So please let me know down below, what did you think of it? Do you think if Chavez Jr. had picked it up earlier on in the fight like he did in the last 2 rounds, could he have made this a closer fight? Could he have maybe even gotten a win? And what do you think Jake Paul needs to do to improve? Obviously, we know his cardio was really poor, but aside from that, what else do you think he needs to do? But anyway, I'll go and catch you guys on another podcast soon. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Thank you for all the support on the channel recently. We're at 120 subscribers, which I really, really appreciate. And thank you all so much for that. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll catch you guys at another podcast soon. Bye bye.